walk, 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 walk. I'm like it bigger than Prince. Walk around like you're 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 bigger than Prince. Walk, 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 walk. Like you're bigger than Prince. Walk around 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 like you're bigger than Prince.
Hello there, everyone. Apologies for that. Sorry. I just welcome everyone. I'm just doing this live today. The reasons behind the live itself is it's an event that happened in May. As we know, in 1927, Charles Lindbergh landed in Paris. I'll get more detail into the story as I go on, but I just want to welcome everyone and say thank you for tuning in. And I'd also like to just welcome MRE, thank you, sir, for he's watching from work. And Sweetie, good to see you. Thank you. So I'm going to get into it pretty much right away. But first off, I've did that sort of intro prior to when the live time that I said I was going to go live on. So now let's get into it and we'll just kick off. There we go. Right. Welcome, everyone. This is the story of Charles Lindbergh. Okay. So just bear with me and we shall start the journey through his life. So first off, I want to Charles Lindbergh. I think most of you know who he is. Those of you who don't, he is famous in history. Hello there, Grapes 1014. Yeah, excellent. Hello there, Tindu. Thank you. So Lindbergh was born in Detroit, in Michigan, on February the 4th, 1902, and spent most of his childhood in Little Falls, Minnesota, and Washington, D.C. He was an only child, so he had no brothers and sisters, and he was the child of Charles August Lindbergh, who had emigrated from Sweden to Minnesota as an infant, and Evangeline Lodgeland Lindbergh of Detroit. Lindbergh had three elder paternal half-sisters, Lillian, Edith, and Eva. The couple separated in 1909 when Lindbergh was just 7 years old. Now, Lindbergh's father, a US congressman from 1907 to 1917, was one of the few congressmen to oppose the entry of the US into World War I. Now, Lindbergh's mother was a chemistry teacher at Cass Technical High School in Detroit and later at Little Falls High School, from which her son graduated on June the 5th, 1918. Now, Lindbergh attended more than a dozen other schools from Washington, D.C. to California during his childhood and teenage years, including the Force School and Sidewell Friends School, while living in Washington with his father, and Redondo Union High School in Redondo Beach, California, while living there with his mother. Now, although Lindbergh enrolled in the College of Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the late 1920s, he dropped out in the middle year of his sophomore year. Now, his early aviation career was Lindbergh had exhibited an interest in the mechanics of motorized transportation, including his family's Saxon 6 automobile and later his Excalibur motorbike. By the time Lindbergh had started college as a mechanical engineer student, he had also become fascinated with flying, though he had never been close to a plane to touch it. And after quitting college in February 1922, Lindbergh enrolled at the Nebraska Aircraft Corporation's flying school in Lincoln and flew for the first time on April the 9th as a passenger in a two-seat Lincoln Standard tourer boat biplane trainer piloted by Otto Tim. Now, a few days later, Lindbergh took his first formal flying lesson in the same aircraft, though he was never permitted to solo because he could not afford to post the requisite. Lindbergh left Lincoln in June to spend the next few months barnstorming across Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana as a wing walker and a parachutist. He also briefly worked as an airplane mechanic at the Billings, Montana municipal airport. Now, Lindbergh left flying with the onset of winter and returned to his father's home in Minnesota. His return to the air and his first solo flight did not come until half a year later in May 1923 at Sutherfield in Americus, Georgia, a former Army flight training field where he bought a World War I surplus Curtiss JM4 Jenny biplane for $500. Now, although Lindbergh had not touched an airplane in more than 6 months, he had already secretly decided that he was ready to take to the air by himself. After an hour of dual time with a pilot who was visiting the field, Lindbergh flew solo for the first time in the journey, and after spending another week or so in the field to practice, Lindbergh took off from Americus of Montgomery, Alabama, some 140 miles to the west, for the first solo cross-country flight. Lindbergh went on to spend much of the remainder of 1923 engaged in almost non-stop barnstorming under the name of Daredevil Lindbergh, the first time flying his own ship as the pilot, and a few weeks after leaving Americus, he made his first flight near Lake Village, Arkansas. So, during when Lindbergh was barnstorming in Lone Rock, Wisconsin, on a couple of occasions, he flew a local physician across the Wisconsin River to emergency calls that were otherwise unreachable because of flooding. Lindbergh broke his propeller a few times whilst landing, and on June 3rd, 1923, he was grounded for a week when he ran into a ditch in Glencoe, Minnesota, while flying his father, then running for the US Senate, to a campaign stop. In October, Lindbergh flew his Jenny to Iowa, where he sold it to a flying student. Lindbergh returned to Lincoln by train, where he joined Leon Klink and continued to barnstorm through the South for the next few months in Klink's Curtiss JM-4C Canuck. Lindbergh also cracked up the aircraft once when the engine failed shortly after takeoff in Pensacola, Florida, but again Lindbergh managed to repair the damage himself. Following a few months brainstorming through the South, the two pilots parted company in San Antonio, Texas, where Lindbergh reported to Brooksfield on March the 19th, 1924, to begin a year of military flight training with the United States Army Air Service. And Lindbergh had his most serious flying accident on March the 5th, 1925, 8 days before his graduation, when a mid-air collision with another Army SE-5 during aerial combat maneuvers forced him to bail out. Only 18 of the 104 cadets who started flight training a year earlier remained when Lindbergh graduated first overall in his class in March 25, thereby earning his pilot wings and a commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Service Reserve Corps. Lindbergh later said that the year was critical to his development, both focused, goal-orientated individual as an aviator. However, the Army did not need additional active duty pilots, so following graduation, Lindbergh returned to civilian aviation as a barnstormer and flight instructor. Although as a reserve officer, he also continued to do some part-time flying by joining the 110th Observation Squadron, 35th Division, Missouri National Guard in St. Louis. Lindbergh was promoted to first lieutenant on December 7th, 1925, and to captain in July 1926. Now, in October 1925, Lindbergh was hired by Robertson Aircraft Corporation, RAC, at the Lambert St. Louis Flying Field in Aglam, Missouri. Now, this was to lay out, then serve as a chief pilot of the newly designated 278-mile contract airmail route to provide service between St. Louis and Chicago, with immediate stops in Springfield, Peoria, Illinois. Lindbergh had 3 RAC pilots, flew the mail over Cantu in a fleet of 4 modified war surplus de Havilland DH-4s. How you doing, Scottish Deborah? Good to see you. Now, on April 13th, 1926, Lindbergh executed the United States Post Office Department's oath of mail messengers, and 2 days later, he opened up the service on the new route. On 2 occasions, combinations of bad weather, equipment failure, and fuel exhaustion forced Lindbergh to bail out on night approach to Chicago. Both times he reached the ground without serious injury, and in mid-February 1927, Lindbergh left San Diego, California, to oversee design and construction of the Spirit of St. Louis. Okay, so there we've got sort of the background, obviously what I've just gone through there. His early childhood, doing his mail runs, obviously learning to become a pilot. So this is the main thing that we've obviously Lindbergh was famous for, hence the date that I mentioned at the beginning of the live, was on May the 20th, which in 1927, Charles Lindbergh piloted his Spirit of St. Louis on the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic. The former airmail pilot and barnstormer flew from New York to Paris in 33 and a half hours, a distance of about 580,000 kilometers, which is 3,610 miles. A crowd of 150,000 greeted him when he landed in Le Bourget Airport. By flying over the Atlantic Ocean from one large city to another, Lindbergh demonstrated in a spectacular and personal way, different from other long-distance flights, that vast distances were no longer barriers and that the potential for long-distance air travel was quickly becoming a reality. When Lindbergh landed in Paris, the American public became enamored with him and with aviation. The stunning achievement produced the Lindbergh boom. Aircraft industry stock rose in value, and the interest in commercial aviation skyrocketed in the United States. So, overnight, Lindbergh became a modern international celebrity who was preyed upon by the media. Immense crowds welcomed him in Europe, the United States, and Latin America. Fame engulfed him. His image and that of the aircraft appeared to almost every type of consumer object imaginable. His celebrity endured, but at great personal cost, while his social and political beliefs turned him into a polarizing figure. Lindbergh used his newly found fame to promote commercial aviation. After his transatlantic flight, he embarked on a goodwill tour, flying around the United States and Latin America, speaking about the future of commercial air travel. So he accepted his position as technical advisor for transcontinental air transport. As technical advisor, he would establish airline routes, organize its infrastructure, and selected its equipment. TAT emerged with parts of Western Air Express to become Transcontinental and Western Air in 1930. Now, Lindbergh also served as a member of the board of directors for Pan American Airways for the rest of his life and was a key player in that airline's expansion. He and his wife, Amaro Lindbergh, flew on two important survey flights on behalf of Pan Am, pioneering potential commercial routes across the Pacific Ocean in 1931 and the Atlantic in 1933 in their Lockheed Cyrus floatplane. These flights helped Pan Am become the first airline to open commercial service across both oceans. Yep. So how you doing there, MRH? Good to see you. Thank you. Good to see you there. Yep. Deborah, I'm going to get to that. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. 100%. Joe Delamora, good to see you, my man. Right. So I'm just going to leave you with this little one just while I take a break.
The first ocean crossing by plane. Pilots kept disappearing into the Atlantic Ocean trying to do this. Then in 1927, a 25-year-old man climbed into a tiny airplane alone, with no radio, no co-pilot, and almost no way to survive if he crashed. This is the story of Charles Lindbergh and the flight that changed the world forever. After World War I, flying across the Atlantic Ocean was considered nearly impossible. Several pilots had already died trying. In 1919, businessman Raymond Ortig offered a $25,000 prize to the first person who could fly non-stop between New York and Paris. For 8 years, nobody succeeded. Then came Lindbergh. He was only 25 years old and worked as an airmail pilot. Unlike the famous teams competing for the prize, Lindbergh planned to fly completely alone. His airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was packed with more than 400 gallons of fuel. The fuel tank blocked his front windshield completely. He literally could not see straight ahead. On May the 20th, 1927, Lindbergh took off from Roosevelt Field in New York. The plane was so overloaded with fuel, it barely cleared the telephone wires at the end of the runway. Then he disappeared into the Atlantic darkness. For 33.5 hours, he fought storms, fog, freezing temperatures, and exhaustion so severe he began hallucinating. Lindbergh later said he saw ghost-like figures floating beside him inside the cockpit, and with no GPS or radar, he navigated using only a compass, maps, and instinct. Then finally, On May 21st, 1927, Paris appeared beneath him. Over 100,000 people flooded Le Bourget airport as Lindbergh landed safely in France. People screamed, cried, climbed onto the runway, and ripped pieces off the airplane as souvenirs. Overnight, Charles Lindbergh became one of the most famous people alive, and his flight proved something humanity had never truly believed before, that airplanes could connect the world.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. So, yeah, so yes, as Deborah's pointed out, obviously with this gentleman in particular, obviously discovering, working with planes and doing the first passenger transatlantic fame, but sadly comes with it there's obviously some sad stories. And yes, everyone's heard or will know him for as well for his child being kidnapped and sadly murdered. How you doing, Tom? Good to see you, my man. So the kidnapping was Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. Basically, he was the 20-year-old son of the famous aviator, as you just mentioned, and his wife, Anne Morrow. He was kidnapped at 9 p.m. on March the 1st, 1932, from the nursery on the second floor of the Lindbergh home near Hopewell, New Jersey. The child's absence was discovered and reported to his parents, who were then at home at approximately 10 p.m. by the child's nurse. Betty Gale, who's the nurse. A search of the premises was immediately made and a ransom note demanding $50,000 was found on the nursery windowsill. After the Hopewell police were notified, the report was telephoned to the New Jersey State Police, who assumed the charge of the investigation. During the search at the kidnapping scene, traces of mud were found on the floor of the nursery. Footprints, impossible to measure, were found under the nursery window. Two sections of the ladder had been used in reaching the window. One of the two sections was split or broken where it joined the other, indicating that the ladder had broken during the ascent and descent. There were no blood stains in or about the nursery, nor were there any fingerprints. Household and estate employees were questioned and investigated. Colonel Lindbergh asked friends to communicate with the kidnappers, and they were made widespread appeals for the kidnappers to start negotiations. Various underworld characters were dealt with in attempts to contact the kidnappers, and numerous clues were advanced and exhausted. A second ransom note was received by Colonel Lindbergh on March the 6th, 1932, in which the ransom demand was increased to $70,000. Police conference was then called by the governor of Trenton, New Jersey, which was attended by prosecuting officials, police authorities, and government representatives. Various theories and policies of procedure were discussed. Private investigators also were employed by Colonel Lindbergh's attorney, Colonel Henry Breckinridge. Now, the third ransom note was received by Colonel Lindbergh's attorney on March the 8th, informing him that an intermediary appointed by the Lindberghs would not be accepted, and requesting a note in a newspaper on the same date. Dr. John F. Condon, Bronx, New York City, a retired school principal, published in the Bronx Home News an offer to act as a go-between to pay an additional $1,000 ransom. Now, the following day, in the fourth ransom note, was received by Dr. Condon, which indicated that he would be acceptable as a go-between. This was approved by Colonel Lindbergh. About March the 10th, 1932, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash as ransom and immediately started negotiations for payment through newspaper columns using the code name JAFSE. That's JAFSIE. And about 8:30 p.m. on March the 12th, after receiving an anonymous telephone call, Dr. Condon received the fifth ransom note, delivered by Joseph Perrone, a taxi cab driver, who received it from an unidentified stranger. The message stated that another note would be found beneath a stone at a vacant stand, 100 feet from an outlying subway station. The note, the sixth, was found by Condon as indicated. Now, following instructions there, it said the doctor met an unidentified man who called himself John at Wood Lawn Cemetery near 233rd Street and Jerome Avenue. They discussed payment of the ransom money. The stranger agreed to furnish a token of the child's identity. Condon was accompanied by a bodyguard, except while talking to John. During the next few days, Dr. Condon repeated his advertisements, urging further contact and stating his willingness to pay the ransom. A baby's sleeping suit as a token of identity and a seventh ransom note were received by Dr. Condon on March the 16th. The suit was delivered by Colonel Lindbergh and later identified. Condon continued his advertisements. Now, the eighth ransom note was received by Condon on March the 21st, insisting on complete compliance and advising that the kidnapping had been planned for a year. On March the 29th, the nurse Betty Gow found the infant's thumb guard worn at the time of the kidnapping near the entrance to the estate. The following day, the ninth ransom note was received by Condon, threatening to increase the demand to $100,000 and refusing a code for use in the newspaper columns. Now, the 10th ransom note received by Dr. Condon on April the 1st, 1932, instructed him to have the money ready the following night, to which Condon replied by an ad in the press. So it said he received it from an unknown man. So Dr. Condon found the 12th ransom note under a stone in front of the greenhouse at 325 East Tremont Avenue, which was Bronx, New York, and as instructed in the 11th note. Now, shortly thereafter, on the same evening, by following the instructions contained in the 12th note, Condon again met whom he believed to be John to reduce the demand to $50,000. This amount was handed to a stranger in exchange for a receipt, and the 13th note containing instructions to the effect of the kidnapped child could be found on a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. The stranger then walked north into the Parkwoods. The following day, an unsuccessful search for the baby was made near Martha's Vineyard. The search was later repeated. Dr. Condon was positive that he would recognize John if he ever saw him again. On May the 12th, 1932, the body of the kidnapped baby was accidentally found, partly buried and badly decomposed, about 4.5 miles southeast of the Lindbergh home. 45 feet from the highway near Mount Rose, New Jersey, in Mercer County. The discovery was made by William and an assistant on a truck driven by Orville Wilson. The head was crushed, there was a hole in the skull, and some of the body members were missing. The body was positively identified and cremated at Trenton, New Jersey on May the 13th, 1932. The coroner's examination showed that the child had been dead for about 2 months and that death was caused by a blow to her head. Makes you feel sick. Now, the investigation, 1932 to 1934. Now, on March the 2nd, 1932, after a conference with the Attorney General, the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had contacted the headquarters of the New Jersey State Police at Trenton, New Jersey. He officially informed the Organization for the U.S. Department of Justice, who afforded Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf and the Superintendent of the New Jersey State Police the assistance and cooperation of the FBI in bringing about the apprehension of the parties responsible for the kidnapping. He advised that the New Jersey State Police that could call upon the Bureau for facilities or resources which later might be capable of extending. Now, the special agent in charge of the New York's office of the Bureau, which of that time covered the New Jersey district, was instructed accordingly, and upon instructions from the director, the special agent in charge communicated with the New Jersey State Police and the New York City Police, offering any assistance which the Bureau might be able to lend to this matter. How you doing, the silent one? Good to see you, my man. Now, during the next few weeks, the Bureau was acting merely in an auxiliary capacity, there being no federal jurisdiction. However, on May the 13th, 1932, the President directed that all governmental investigative agencies should place themselves at the disposal at the disposal of the state of New Jersey, and that the FBI should serve as a clearinghouse and coordinating agency for all investigations, in this case conducted by the federal investigation units. Now, during the next few weeks of the Bureau was acting merely in an exorbitant beg your pardon. So on May 23rd, 1932, the FBI and New York City informed banks in Greater New York that the Bureau was the coordinating agency of all governmental activity on the case, and a close watch for ransom money was requested. Now, the New Jersey State Police announced on May 26, 1932, the offer of a reward not to exceed $25,000 for information resulting in the apprehension and conviction of the kidnapper or kidnappers. In compliance with the request made by Colonel Schwarzkopf, copies of this notice of reward were forwarded by the FBI to law enforcement officials and agencies throughout the United States. Now, on June the 10th, 1932, Violet Sharp, a waitress in the home of Mrs. Lindbergh's mother, Miss Dwight Morrow, who had been under investigation by the authorities, committed suicide by swallowing poison when she was about to be re-questioned. However, her movements on the night of March the 1st, 1932 had been carefully checked, and it was soon definitely ascertained that she had no connection with the abduction. So in September 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt stated in a meeting with Director Hoover and all work on the case to be centralized in the Department of Justice. He requested the director to convey his views to the Attorney General Cummings, with the suggestion that the Attorney General make request of the Commissioner of the Inland Revenue Services, either through the President or directly, for a detailed report of all work performed by the IRS Intelligence Unit. On October the 19th, 1933, it was officially announced that the FBI would have exclusive jurisdiction insofar as the federal government was concerned in the handling of any investigation features of the case. Now, the President proclamation requiring that the return of the Treasury of all gold and gold certificates was a valuable aid in the case, inasmuch as 40,000 of the ransom money had been paid in gold certificates, and at the time of proclamation, a large portion of this money was known to be outstanding. Therefore, this phase of the investigation was emphasised. On January 17th, 1934, a circular letter was issued by the New York City Bureau Office to all banks and their branches in New York City, requesting extremely close watch for the ransom certificates. And in February 1934, all Bureau offices were supplied with copies of the Bureau's revised pamphlet containing the serial numbers of ransom bills. Now, the New York City Bureau Office distributed copies of the pamphlet to each employee handling currency in banks, clearinghouses, grocery stores in certain selected communities, insurance companies, gasoline filling stations, airports, department stores, post offices, and telegraph companies. Now, following the distribution of these booklets containing the serial number of the ransom currency, there was also prepared and similarly distributed by the Bureau currency key cards, which in convenient form set forth the inclusive serial numbers of all the ransom notes which had been paid. This was followed by frequent personal contacts with the bank officials and with individual employees in an effort to keep alive their interests. Now, prior to this time, the passing of the ransom bills had been reported to the FBI and the New Jersey State Police or the New York State Police Department, none of which had complete information on this point. Therefore, arrangements were effected whereby investigations of all ransom bills detected in the future could be immediately conducted jointly by the representatives of all three interested agencies. Now, one of the byproducts of the case was a mass misinformation received from well-meaning but uninformed, highly imaginative individuals, and a deluge of letters written by demented persons, public seekers, and frauds. It was essential, however, that all possible clues, regardless of the prospect of success, be carefully followed, and it was possible, in the vast majority of instances, determine at the inception whether they would be material or false. Now, on March the 4th, 1932, a con man named Gaston B. Means was approached by Mrs. Evelyn Walsh McLean of Washington, D.C., who felt that she might be of material assistance to Colonel Lindbergh in procuring the return of his child. Mrs. McLean had become acquainted with Means, and as a result, some investigation work, which means that had been performed for her husband some years before. Means informed that he felt certain he could secure a contact with the kidnappers, in as much as he had been invited to participate in a big kidnapping some weeks before, but had declined. Means claimed that his friend was responsible for the Lindbergh kidnapping. The following day, Means reported to Mrs. McLean that he had been in contact with the person who had the child. He successfully induced Mrs. McLean to hand over $100,000 to be used in paying the ransom, which he said had been doubled. Until April the 17th, 1932, he kept Mrs. McLean waiting, daily expecting the return of the child. During this period, he purported to be effecting negotiations with the alleged leader of the kidnappers, whom he called the Fox. Mrs. McLean finally requested the return of $100,000 and additional money which she had advanced him for expenses, which he failed to do so, and the case was turned over to the FBI. Means and the Fox, who found to be Norman T. Whitaker, a disbarred Washington attorney, were apprehended, and Means was later convicted of embezzlement and larceny after trust, and sentenced to serve 15 years in the federal penitentiary. Whitaker and Means were later convicted of conspiracy to defraud and were sentenced to 2 years each in the federal penitentiary. Now, there were other attempted frauds which require extensive investigations before they could be completely eliminated from consideration in connection with the Lindbergh case. Now, in all, there were literally thousands of leads in all sections of the United States who were followed for their definite conclusions of the Bureau. So, on May the 2nd, 1933, a Federal Reserve Bank of New York discovered 296 $10 gold certificates and one $20 gold certificate, all Lindbergh ransom notes. These bills were included among the currency received at the Federal Reserve Bank on May the 1st, 1933, and apparently had been made in one deposit. Immediately upon the discovery of these bills, deposit tickets at the Federal Reserve on the 1st of May 1933 were examined, and one was found bearing the name and address of J.J. Faulkner, 537 West 149th Street, and a mark there on golden certificates, $10 and $20 in the amount of $2,980. Now, examination of the ransom notes by handwriting experts resulted in virtually anonymous opinion on all notes were written by the same person, that the writer of the German nationality had spent some time in America. Dr. Condon described John as Scandinavian and believing he could identify the man. Now, he spent considerable time in viewing numerous photographs of possible suspects and known criminals. In this connection, the FBI retained the services of an artist to prepare a portrait of John from descriptions furnished by Dr. Condon and Joseph Perrone, the taxi driver who had delivered one of the ransom letters to Dr. Condon. Now, in further endeavour to identify the individual who received the ransom payments, representatives of the New York City Bureau office engaged Dr. Condon to prepare a transcript of all conversations had by him with John on March the 12th and April the 2nd, 1932, and the dates on which Dr. Condon personally contacted the kidnapper in order to negotiate the return of the child and the payment of the ransom. Now, these conversations during March 1934 is transcribed in detail on a phonograph records by Dr. Condon, who imitated the pronunciations and dialect of John. In this manner, the nationality, education, mentality, and character of the kidnapper were more clearly defined and permanently preserved for future use. Now, Huttman is located. So, Huttman, for a period of 7 months prior to August 20, 1934, no gold certificates were discovered except for those received in the Federal Reserve Bank, as I previously mentioned. Starting on August the 20th, 1934, and extending into September, a total of 16 gold certificates were discovered, most of them in the facility of Yorkville and Harlem. The long-awaited opportunity had finally arrived. As the bill was recovered, a coloured pin marking the location of the recovered bill was inserted in a large map of the metropolitan area, thus indicating the movements of the individuals who might be passing the ransom money. When the first few made their appearance, it was decided to concentrate on gold certificates. As experience had proven, that the futility of tracing an ordinary currency was included in the ransom money. Now, keeping with the cooperative policy previously established with the New Jersey State Police and the New York City Police Department, their teams composed of representatives of each of these police agencies, and a special agent of the Bureau were organized to personally contact all banks in Greater New York and Westchester County. As a result, the various neighborhood banks discovered the bills close to the point at which they were passed, and it then became possible for investigators to trace the bills to the person who had originally passed them. Now, for the first time in the history of the case, the investigators succeeded in finding that the description of the individual passing these bills fit exactly that of John. As described by Dr. Condon, it was determined throughout the investigation that bills were being passed principally at corner produce stores. So, at 1:20 p.m. on September the 18th, 1934, the assistant manager of the Corn Exchange Bank and Trust Company at 125th Street and Park Avenue, New York City, telephoned the New York City Bureau office to advise that a $10 gold certificate had been discovered a few minutes previously by one of the tellers in that bank. Now, it was soon ascertained that the bill had been received at the bank from a gasoline station located on 127th Street and Lexington Avenue, New York City. On September the 15th, 1934, an alert had received a bill in payment for 5 gallons of gasoline from a man whose description fitted closely that of the individual who had passed other bills in recent weeks. The filling station attendant, being suspicious of the $10 gold certificate, recorded on the bill the license number of the automobile driven by the purchaser. This license number was issued to Bruno Richard Hutman. Now, Bruno Richard Hutman is of 127.9 East 222nd Street, Bronx, New York. Now, Hutman's house was closely surveilled by federal and local authorities throughout the night of September the 18th, 1934, until approximately 9 a.m. on September the 19th, 1934. An individual closely fitting the description of John as supplied by Dr. Condon and the description of the purchaser of the gasoline as supplied by the service station attendant left his house and entered his automobile parked nearby. He was promptly taken into custody by representatives of the 3 interested agencies. After some investigating, he was found to be Bruno Richard Hutman, the individual whom the automobile license had issued, a German carpenter who had been in the country approximately 11 years. A $20 gold ransom certificate was found on his person. His description fitted perfectly that of John as described by Dr. Condon, and in his house was found a pair of shoes which had been purchased with a $20 ransom bill recovered on recovered on September the 8th, 1934. Now, Hutman admitted to several other purchases which had been made with ransom certificates. So on the night of September 19th, 1934, he was positively identified by Joseph Perrone and the individual from whom he had received the 5th ransom note to be delivered to Dr. Condon. The following day, the ransom certificates in excess of 13,000 were found secreted in the garage of Hutman's residence. Shortly thereafter, he was identified by Dr. Condon as John, to whom the ransom bill had been paid. It was also ascertained that he was in possession of a Dodge, a sedan automobile, which answered the description of that seen in the vicinity of Lindbergh home the day prior to the kidnapping. Shortly after his apprehension, specimens of Hutman's handwriting were flown to Washington, D.C., where a study was made of them in the FBI laboratory. A comparison of the writing appearing on the ransom notes without specimens disclosed remarkable similarities, inconspicuous personal characteristics and writing habits, which resulted in a positive identification by the handwriting experts of the laboratory. Upon the apprehension of Hutman, it was found that he bore a stinking resemblance to the portrait of John, which had been previously prepared from descriptions furnished by Dr. Condon and Joseph Perrone. Further investigations developed that Hutman, 35 years old, was a native of Saxony, Germany. He had a criminal record for robbery and had spent time in prison. Early in July 1923, he stowed away from aboard the SS Hanover at Bremen, Germany, and arrived at the port of New York City July 13, 1923. He was arrested and deported immediately. After another failed attempt at entry in August, Hutman successfully entered the United States in November 1923 on board the George Washington. And on October the 10th, 1925, Hutman married Anna Schofler, a New York City waitress. A son, Manfred, was born to them in 1933 during his illegal stay in New York City, and until the spring of 1932, Hutman followed his occupation of carpentry. However, after March the 31st, 1932, the date of the kidnapping, Hutman began to trade rather extensively in stocks and never worked again. How you doing, Burnley, till I die? Good to see you, my man. So, the trial, indictment and the execution. Hutman was indicted on the Supreme Court, Bucks County, New York, on charges of extortion on September the 26th, 1934, on October the 8th, 1934, and in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, he was indicted for murder. 2 days later, the governor of the state of New York honoured the requisition of the governor of the state of New Jersey for the surrender of Bruno Richard Hutman on October 19, 1934. He was removed to the Hunterdon County Jail, Flemington, New Jersey, to await trial. The trial of Hutman began on January the 3rd, 1935 at Flemington, New Jersey, and lasted 5 weeks. The case against him was based on circumstantial evidence. Tool marks on the ladder matched tools owned by Hutman. Wood in the ladder was found to match the wood used on the floor in his attic. Dr. Condon's telephone number and address were found scrawled on a door frame inside a closet. Handwriting on the ransom note matched samples of Hutman's handwriting. Now, no problem, Burnley. Now, on February the 13th, 1935, the jury returned a verdict. Hutman was guilty of murder in the first degree, the sentence death. The defence appealed. The Supreme Court of the State of New Jersey on October the 9th, 1935, upheld the verdict of the lower court. Hutman's appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States was denied on December the 9th, 1935, and he was to be electrocuted on January the 17th, 1936. However, on the same day, the governor of the state of New Jersey granted a 30-day reprieve. On February the 17th, 1936, Hutman was resentenced to be electrocuted during the week of March 30th, 1936. On March the 30th, 1936, the Pardon Court of the state of New Jersey denied Hutman's petition for clemency, and on April the 3rd, 1936, at 8:47 p.m., Bruno Richard Hutman was electrocuted. Hallelujah. So, it's going to...
The first ocean crossing by plane. Pilots kept disappearing into the...
March 1st, 1932, Hopewell, New Jersey. The infant son of Charles Lindbergh, the world-famous aviator, is taken from his nursery. A ransom note demands $50,000, written in broken English and marked with strange symbols. For weeks, letters arrive. The nation follows every move. On April 2nd, gold certificates are handed over at a Bronx cemetery. The child is never returned. On May 12th, the body of Charles Lindbergh Jr. is found near Mount Rose, just miles from home. Traced ransom bills lead to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, arrested in 1934 and executed in the electric chair in 1936. The case reshapes U.S. law. Kidnapping becomes a federal crime. Like and subscribe.
All right, everyone. Let me just go to the chat. If you're still there, thank you for tuning in. Silent one, thank you for coming. Has anyone who's still about got any questions? If you're still there, Tom, good to see you, my man. Thank you for coming. Joe Delamora, good man. Rob Rat Hunter, Grapes, good man. MRE, here we go. Yeah, so I just wanted to get that out, just present that to you all. It's something that helps me. As I say, just getting used to. I know I've been doing this for a little while, but I like to do it and present stuff. So yeah, it's good from my standpoint because I kind of it's US history, and it's something that's obviously not really pushed sort of in our curriculum over here. But you know, we depend on aviation for our holidays and traveling to and from countries, obviously sadly from the standpoint of war, but it's what connects the world up, really. I've known that from the incident from a virtual standpoint, but being able to travel, and then you've got these people, look, like they are unsung heroes, Charles Lindbergh. But obviously that last part, which I probably was a bit long-winded, but like I say, it's just we get all these hero stories, and then you get the tragedies, you know. But as I say, I'm happy I got that out. I know I've still got a few of you watching. Is there anybody in the chat that has any more questions? I'd like to chip in and say something. I know you've probably been hammered to death with words, but I like to try and keep this interactive. Okay. Right. Well, how long have we been on? All right, nearly an hour. It's quite long. Right. On that note, let's do a quick roll call. MRE, Sweet Tea, MRH, Joe Delamora, Bernie Till I Die, Silent One, Tindu, Janie, good to see you, Scottish Deborah, Grapes, thank you all for popping in, showing support. I really appreciate it. So on that note, I think I'm going to end the stream. So everyone.